Welcome to Adulting on the Spectrum. I am Andrew Comero, an autistic certified financial planner. I co-run Adulting on the Spectrum with my host, Eileen Lamb. Hey, Eileen.
Hey everyone. In this podcast, we want to highlight real voices of autistic adults, not just inspirational stories, but real people talking about their boring life. Basically, we want to give a voice to people like us.
Today, our guest is Jeff Snyder. He was born in Providence, Rhode Island, has lived his entire life in Seekonk, Mass. He was diagnosed with autism in 1990, and ever since then, he has achieved multiple successes in life in areas of education, long-term employment, independent living, and speaking engagements in panels.
Hey Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you guys. Thank you very much for having me.
So Jeff, we want to ask our guests what they identify as far as autism identity go. You know how some people prefer on the spectrum, autistic. So you tell us, and also your preferred pronouns.
Well, first of all, I'm usually very open-minded with identity and stuff, and I always use I use autistic with autism in my talks and my presentations, and then my pronouns are he and him, and I'm also hashtag actually autistic and hashtag neurodiverse squad.
Nice. We like open-mindedness on this podcast.
What was it like for you growing up on the spectrum? You were diagnosed at such a relatively young age, and what was that like for you?
Well, I was first diagnosed with autism in December of 1990. And at that time, I was 21 months old. And also at that time, at the time of my diagnosis, the ratio was 1 in 10,000 for an autism diagnosis. And nowadays, it's really shocking. It's 1 in 54. But to get back to what I was talking about, I actually didn't even know I had autism until 1998 when Nick News came to my house and filmed me for a subject on autism. And but before that, I knew I was acting differently from my peers and from other kids I went to school with. I knew I had something going on. I just didn't know what it was. So it wasn't until I was in 4th grade that I eventually learned the truth via Nick News.
So your parents didn't tell them?
No.
Sorry.
I wasn't told. I kind of had to learn for myself. So.
Do you know why they decided not to tell you about your diagnosis, and how do you feel about it? Do you wish that they had told you?
Well, I mean, they could have told me, but I don't really know. But that's fine. If I was told that I had autism, then maybe they would have used an analogy like you have magic powers or you have a special gift. And also, you could also, and then you could also have a sense that, but yeah, that sort of thing. But yeah, that was how. I mean, it would have been any differently than it would have been no different than when I was interviewed by Nick News. So I mean, that's ever since then, that's how I got my diagnosis. If I could offer one bit of advice for parents who are struggling to tell their newly diagnosed children is that just ensure that say that autism is like you have a special gift, or say something like you're a wizard, kind of like in Harry Potter. And also be sure to be open and honest. I mean, don't be scared to say to your child that you're never going to succeed in anything. Say to them that you're going to succeed in life. You're going to make friends. You're going to make a name for yourself, and we're going to be with you every step of the way.
That sounds very positive. What would you say to parents of autistic children who, might not be able to achieve these things? Like, for instance, my son is 8 and he's on the severe end of the spectrum, and he's probably going to be one of those, autistic adults that can't live independently and can't communicate on his own. So that's I that's why I have such mixed feelings about the autism is a superpower thing, because in some ways, for some people, sure it is, but for some people, it will never be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will say this for parents who are struggling who are struggling with their children that may never end up being independent. And I got to tell you, I mean, the thing is, when in life, we all want to be independent in some way, but there's a lot of components that come into being independent. There's financial independence, there's transportational independence, and all these things can really, and these are very, very critical steps. And if the child cannot obtain that independence, then you know what? It's not the end of the world. The important thing is we have to be there in the child's life. But however, they can't be they cannot have any, they may not have the independence that a normal person would have. It's just, it is, but the key factor is to always, be there and say, you know what, you are not alone. We're going to be with you every step of the way, and we will help you in any way possible for you to obtain some level of that independence that you want to have. Because you have to also remember, some people may not end up some people may not end up ever driving a car, or may forever lack the skills to live on their own. So that's one thing you really have to keep in mind, is just because someone doesn't achieve that level of independence, then it's okay. And it's also a good idea to connect with other parents who are in the same boat as you. You would have to, you could get their perspective from their point of view, and also you can connect with parents and families in one way or another, because they know what you're feeling, and you know what they're feeling. So it's kind of like it's more about being on the same page when it comes to being there for your for children and adults who are neurodiverse and are struggling to or who may never have independence that they want to have.
Yeah, I like that. The message that you're not alone. That's something that I try to tell people on social media too, because honestly, it feels very lonely sometimes. And just knowing that other people are going through what you're going through helps, it in some ways, it doesn't take all of the struggles away, of course, but it's nice to connect with other people and find our tribe, like we say. So you describe yourself as an autism advocate. I think I got that right. So what does autism advocacy mean to you?
Well, for me, autism and neurodiversity self-advocacy is meaning that, you're getting out there and you're reaching out to individuals and their families who may not realize that, who may not fully understand what they are really going for. And because a lot of because you and I were talking, Eileen, before the interview, that when I was first diagnosed with autism, it was 1 in 10,000. That was the diagnosis ratio. Now in 2021, nearly over 30 years after I was diagnosed, it's now 1 in 54. So being a self-advocate is a field onto itself, because you're getting your name out there to say to families and individuals that, you know what, I've been down that road and I can help you out. And I'm also a public speaker, so I've done talks about growing up on the spectrum, and I've actually done that through a presentation called Autism and Disney Characters. There's 2 volumes to that. I've mostly been presenting volume 1 and hoping to present volume 2 at some point. And each of those 2 presentations identify certain Disney characters that may display traits of autism that we may not be able to see or understand. However, those traits that the characters demonstrate, they are the same traits that neurodiverse people will display in life, whether it's being clumsy or being prone to wandering or having routines disruptive or a lack of personal boundaries. All these things can really be identified through Disney characters. And then also another thing that I'm very passionate about is workplace inclusion, because I've worked in retail for over 15 years. And one thing that I've started to try to do is to try to reach out to retail companies to try to see if they can make their stores inclusive. Because at my place of employment, during the pandemic, they set aside the first 90 minutes of the business day for senior citizens and people who are susceptible to the coronavirus. And I said to myself, why can't we do that for people with like sensory issues or who are neurodiverse? So that would be the goal that I would have, is to reach out to companies and say, you know what, for like an hour or for 60 to 90 minutes once a week, have your store be sensory friendly, lower the fluorescent lighting, lower the music, and also turn off any unnecessary noise, whether it's the beeping at the checkouts, or and also train your staff to be neurodiverse friendly and train them how to help out individuals who may be having meltdowns. So that would be something that I would like to see in retail companies accept, but again, there has to be, a 2-sided moment here. Both sides will need to win, and they will do whatever it can. And if they do that,
and I saw something just this week in Vogue Business of all places, and I was through the roof excited, that was talking about neurodiversity in retail. And something that I was so pleasantly surprised that the article mentioned was smell as well. And it's a combination of all of the, again, sensory overload. And sometimes it's not just one thing, but it's a combination. And what they found too, I think, when it comes to the retail stores, is that if they, other people liked coming in during those senior hours, right? It's the very definition of universal design, right? Which should mean if it's good for one person with autism, it should be good for everyone, right? So I think that, I think that it's moving in the right direction with awareness and advocacy. And one thing I really like that you said is your definition of advocacy, because I think you've been an advocate for a long time. Some would argue since the day you found out you had autism, when you were advocacy with Nick Jr., right? But how, what I really like is how that you separate advocacy is about helping others and being kind and spreading a message and awareness. and not just, talking about, your story. You have a change, and you have things that you want to share, and not just to share a story, but, very specific goals and things you could relate to. So I want to say thank you, because that's quantifiable, right? Almost everyone needs to go to retail stores, and almost everyone would want them to be sensory friendly. And the more people working on that, the better. Is advocacy your career? Because there are many, some might consider myself an advocate. I'm not a paid advocate, and I consider it, a privilege to be able to have a job that allows me to also advocate. And there's nothing, but I think there's many who would like to be paid and compensated and make their advocacy a career. And it sounds like you've made it at least a portion of your career. And could you talk about that and maybe some advice for others who would like to do the same?
Well, to be honest, I've actually, this particular, my advocacy, I've actually been doing, the bulk of this has been for the past for almost 2 years now, has been the main portion of this advocacy. Prior to that, I was in the Brony fandom. And for those of you who don't know, Bronies are fans of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. And I would go to Brony conventions. And I would see people, give presentations on aspects from that show. And that was kind of my formal training, if you will. And I was also a fan fiction writer. I was also a fanfic writer. I was a freelance fan fiction writer for the show. So that was kind of my formal training. And then after the Brony fandom died down, I decided to take what I learned from being in the Brony fandom and bringing it to autism self-advocacy. And some of the things I brought into were the sense of community, because the Brony fandom was a community of people with the same interests and the same goals as I had. And then also there's the matter of speaking in front of your peers was another one, because you can speak and talk about whatever you want to share in front of an audience. And then it actually goes further than that, because I was also a gifted public speaker when I was in school. I did a lot of I had done creative presentations for some of my classes when I was in school. So that was one other key aspect to my training. And then I actually, and then I sort of built this advocacy from sort of like a business, if you will. I mean, I've done 2 paid speaking engagements this year, which I have been compensated for, made about upwards of like $300 already for those 2 events. But yeah, I mean, I would like to try to, but it's more about, I would like to get more, engagements where I get compensated. However, it's more about getting the message out there. It's more about getting people to come and listen to what I have to say, because some of the things that I say are things that people have never heard about before. So that could be something that's more of the message that I have. And yes, this is kind of a career for me. It's a career that, as of right now, it doesn't pay very much. But again, it's more about getting the message out there. And I also have a profile on Speaker Hub that I sometimes go on to look for like paid speaking engagements there. So like if I want to apply for a paid speaking engagement, I'll go on to Speaker Hub, but it's more about them coming to me rather than me going out to them. It's not just about getting your name out there. It's just about how can you bring them in and listen to what you have to say. And it's one other thing. And another thing I have to keep in mind in terms of being an advocate and a public speaker is you got to have rhino skin, because not everyone is going to want to hear what you have to say. you have to, you're going to get people who are going to say, no, I don't want you to speak for this event, or I don't want you, we think that what you're presenting is not going to be acceptable. That's one thing that I have to, that's one, if I could give someone who's trying to be a self-advocate and a public speaker for the autism and neurodiverse communities, that is trying to get that sort of, who's trying to, you know, become a public speaker, that's what you're going to have to contend with, is you got to have rhino skin when it comes to having, when it comes to, you know, doing your advocacy and stuff. And also some people may also be very opinionated with, can also be extremely opinionated because
Yeah, let me ask you about that. I know you've spoken about autism and bullying before, you know, because some people have very strong opinions on social media and they share it. They will let you know about it. And it can be hard sometimes to be an autism advocate when people are so eager to share their views and they feel so strongly about them. So can you tell us more about autism and bullying and how you feel about it?
well, I mean, and I'm going to say right now, I was never bullied in school, but some of my friends who are also neurodiverse have been bullied, and there's actually, and honestly, and also in the first two characters I talk about in my Autism and Disney characters presentation talks about, you know, being easy targets. Like the character of Gus from Cinderella, he is very, very, he's very, very prone to bullying from Lucifer the cat, and he is very, very prone to bullying because that what Lucifer and Gus represent are individuals on the spectrum that are very, that are very vulnerable. They're very vulnerable to specific bullying. They're vulnerable to bullies, and that's what Gus represents in Cinderella. So that's one thing that you really have to, you know, keep in mind, is that what you see in characters like Gus is what you're going to see in real life. And unfortunately, in the age of social media, we're seeing online bullies, you know, target their victims from the comforts of their own home, and that is a very that's a major problem. So you really have to keep in mind that bullying can happen not just nowadays. Bullies can happen not just in schools. They can also happen online, and that's a major problem that I think a lot of organizations will have to contend with going forward.
Eileen, you should ask the next question, even though I was gonna, because we got to see the puppy.
Oh, yeah. So what do you think about the actually autistic hashtag, and why do you use that hashtag when it's often associated with, you know, hate, and sometimes hate that is directed at you too?
Well, it's more about you know, letting people know that I'm on the spectrum, and you know, I'm autistic. I'm, you know, I'm a smart person, but you know, I do have the flaws, and I do have, you know, the work. I mean, I'm always going to be a work in progress. I've got dents, I've got quirks, but I've got flaws that make us work. And for those of you who don't know, that's actually lyrics from a song on My Little Pony called "We're Not Flawless" from season 7. So that is a good example right there of, you know, nobody's perfect, and you know, you can write down your mistakes. They're written in ink. So that to me is something that will, I mean, it's okay to show your identity for who you are. You know, but I'm also a member of the neurodiverse squad. That's the other hashtag I use, because I know what it's like. I know how it is. I know what it's like to go through, you know, being on the spectrum and dealing with critics that you may not be able to understand what they're saying, or you might translate that as something like as something offensive. So so that's where things, really go for. So
But I think those hashtags, especially actually autistic in particular, for people who may not be aware, are commonly associated with the very bullies who you mentioned. Are you just kind of doing your own thing and knowing that you're doing things right? Are you afraid that, people will maybe associate you with bullies as some might? Or do you think that the hashtag is here to stay? So the best thing to do is kind of reclaim it with your kindness. And how do you stay so genuinely nice and kind in the state of everything and just in the face of adversity and challenges and hate? How are you so nice?
well, the important thing is that I try to be a good role model for people. I mean, I have to, and also part of the reason why I got into autism and neurodiversity advocacy is because I have two nieces. One is 4 years old, and my youngest is 1. So part of the reason why I became an advocate is because they are going to be growing up among people who are on the autism spectrum. And the last thing I want is for them to grow up and end up being bullies to other students who are neurodiverse or on the autism spectrum. And if by doing this advocacy, I'm kind of teaching them for what they're going to expect later on and when they get older. But then also the fact of the matter is that, and the fact is that, I can always change from actually autistic to something else. Maybe that might be the best way to get attention. But I do disclaim that, I don't want to offend anyone, and I'm really doing this for the common good.
That's really good. We've been trying to get some tractions on other hashtags, which have been very controversial, like actually diagnosed. Because we feel that sometimes self-diagnosed people tend to control the narrative around autism, and there's been a big increase in self-diagnosis with social media, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and sometimes, I mean, obviously, out of all of these people, some of them are not going to be autistic. It's just they can be. Yet they speak for the entire autistic community as if we all think the same. First of all, that's an insane thing to think, because we're all individuals, and we're not all going to share the same views on autism. But yeah, my point is we tried like using the actually diagnosed hashtags, and maybe that's a bit too on the other extreme, and there is somewhere in the middle, because we don't want to exclude people who don't have access to a formal diagnosis because it's too expensive, but who are actually on the spectrum.
Yes.
But it's a fine line between the two. Like, how do you feel about self-diagnosis and including those people, but at the same time making sure they don't speak over or speak for the entire community? How do we do that?
Well, if you want to do a self-diagnosis, I would probably seek out like a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and they will be the ones that will officially make the diagnosis. People who self-diagnose, that's kind of walking a fine line in terms of you want to share your story with the world, but how are people going to react to it is the one story. Because people who say, hashtag self-diagnosed with autism or any neurodiverse condition, some people may view that as gaining a form of attention, or, this person is doing this to, try to be better than somebody. but it's better to get diagnosed by a professional, medical professional, than just say, hey, everybody, I'm on the autism spectrum. So, I mean, that's well, yeah, I mean, if anyone on here, if anyone's listening to this interview that wants to find out if they're on the if they're neurodiverse or not, then I would seek out I would seek out a medical professional and let them be the judge of whether you have autism or not.
I think we share the same views. It's nice to be able to talk about these things because these are important topics in the autism community, and I don't hear actual conversations about it very often. So I appreciate you sharing your thought on that. Is there anything else you want to share about Disney? Some really cool facts that you're just burning to tell us?
Well, like I said, I've created two presentations based on autism and Disney characters. Hopefully, I can present volume 2 at some point. But I'm also a big Disney buff as well. As you can see, just above my shoulder, you'll see the original Tinkerbell from Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. So, but I've been a huge Disney fan all my life, and I've been to Disneyland. I actually have a cousin that works at Disneyland. I've been to Walt Disney World once, but I kind of prefer Disneyland because it's the park that Walt himself walked on, and it's also very easily navigationable. So, but yeah, I mean, I collect all the Disney movies. I've collected any Disney related material growing up, and then that sort of thing. And then also I've written fan fiction. And for those of you who don't know what fan fiction is, fan fiction are stories based on movies, cartoons, books, any form of entertainment. So I've written several Disney fanfics that are currently on fanfiction.net and also on deviantart.com. So and my username is Twilight Sparkle 3562 if you're interested.
I'm sure some people will. I know Disney is a special interest of a lot of people, even those who are not on the spectrum. So
yeah.
You'll get some. It is reading. It's stories that you wrote, or is it audio?
It's stories that I've written.
It's written. Okay, cool. Yeah, I like reading. All right, we want to ask you some quick fire questions now. So I ask you a question and you tell me the first answer that comes to your mind.
Okay.
Good. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Basically just to be myself and don't let others, doubt me for who I am. I mean, I was born this way and I'll live this way.
Beautiful. What do you like to do to relax? I think I know.
Well, for one thing, I like to, play video games. I like to watch movies. I have a large physical DVD collection, and I also like to, go for walks and stuff. And
VHS?
DVD.
You don't have VHS?
I used to have VHSs, but they're at my folks' house.
We just had a guest who was so happy because he just got a VHS tape and he was so excited to have it in his hands. Hi, Seth, if you see us. What is your favorite food?
My favorite food is there's a whole variety. There's like pork chops, rice pilaf. I like chicken parm. So
good. What's your favorite movie? TV show?
Favorite movie as a kid, it was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and as an adult, it's Fantasia.
Oh, good. Okay, tricky question. What is your favorite DreamWorks movie?
I would have to say probably Shrek. the Shrek films.
Yeah, I've seen those, Andrew. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really great to chat with you. And if you want to tell our followers where they can find you on social media, I know we've kind of touched on that, but if you want to tell them again, tell them now.
I am on Facebook. I am also on I'm on Facebook. I am on LinkedIn. I am on Twitter, and I am on Instagram. And I'm going to put into the chat wall for you guys to share it in a follow-up. I'm on WordPress. I have a blog called Going the Distance. It is the website is Jeff Snyder Autism Neurodiversity Self-Advocate.wordpress.com. I update blogs every Monday through Friday. And then I also have listed my speaking services, volunteer services. If you ever want me to come out and speak to your organization, or also if you want me to help out with like be on a panel or help out with like any volunteer events, fundraisers, you can also reach out to me that way. In addition, I am also a contributor to a book called This is Autism by Jessica Leichwise and Aidan Allman Cooper. It is currently on Amazon.com for $19.97. And if you ever want me to sign you a copy at a future in-person event, please bring your copy and I'll be happy to sign it for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
You're
Thank
very
you.
welcome.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.